the Sicha of unity and separation, learning about kilayim. So kilayim are when two things individually are permitted and you mix up together, it becomes prohibited. We saw don't sow other species in your vineyard, and it's not just that, it's when you plant and sow, etc. Everything has to be according to its kind. That eventually leads to grafting. Don't create new species. Ramban tells us God created enough in this world, enough to start making new stuff. Also, we know that on a much higher level, the power of reproduction gets affected if you start mixing stuff. You also have the angels. There's not a blade of grass that doesn't have a mazel, which higher up is an angel that tells it to grow. So when you start grafting, you start mixing stuff up, because even if you just mix it up enough that they're still feeding off each other, they didn't really graft, but you kind of did, then everything gets mixed up above, and everything is supposed to be according to its kind. There's an order to everything. That's as far as agriculture goes. Then we see don't plow with an ox and donkey together. You could have an ox, you could have a donkey, but you just can't put them both under the same harness, basically. You can't yoke them together. It's the way of the world, but the farmers will stable them together, and that could lead to crossbreeding. The example of an ox and donkey, even though this applies across the board to all animals, you shouldn't mix them up. If you have a team of animals, it should all be the same team of animals. And then eventually we have don't crossbreed, which is the same kind of idea as the plants. We're not creating new species, and the power of reproduction gets affected when you do that. So there's something essential that gets messed up between agriculture and animals when you start mixing them up. Then you have don't wear a mixture of wool and linen together. That's shatnez. Shatnez, as we learned, is an acronym for different ways that you can mix wool and linen together to create a garment or anything that comes upon you, because like a blanket or things like that is still counted. Several differences about shatnez. One, it's not an essential mixture, because we see eventually you could separate them if you would want to. Also, shatnez is the only one that combines from two different kingdoms. Unlike the agriculture, which is just plants and plants trying to create a new plant, the animals, which is animal trying to create a new animal. Wool and linen is from the plant and animal kingdom together. Shatnez is still part of kilayim, but there are a few features that make it different. One is that it's not the essential mixture, shown by the fact that you can take them apart. And the other is that there are exceptions for it, / mitzvahs for it, which are the tzitzis. Tzitzis can be made out of shatnez, which also, remember, they describe it that the fact that you take the strings of the tzitzis are tied on. They're not sewn on or anything like that. That shows us also you can't just tie the two materials together. Because the fact that it's an exemption shows us that it's also not allowed. And then the belt of the Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash. So the belt was made out of shatnez. These are two exemptions. The Beis HaMikdash is all about sublimating evil, so there's not the risk of things that can happen when you mix them together. Tzitzis reminds you about Torah mitzvos, because we see the extreme version of this. It's not that it can't reproduce, but instead we see Cain and Hevel. One brought a sheep, and one brought flax, aka linen. Those fatal consequences. They couldn't get along in the world. But because of what these mitzvahs are associated with, they don't necessarily have that risk attached to it. So that's an exception. We also see from Eshes Chayil, Shlomo Melech, King Solomon tells us about the Eshes Chayil, who works with basically wool and linen also. And she could do it. She's a purely God-fearing person. Fun fact, speaking about the clothing of the Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash, there was a very ordered system for how they have their clothes set up. There would be shifts between all the families of Kohanim of who would show up when to be doing their jobs. And then also they had like a locker system in place. But when they wore the clothing, which they wore during the divine service, if it got dirty, they didn't wash it. Instead, they turned it into wicks. They took the material and they turned it into wicks. So there's not like a laundry system going on in the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, the last category we didn't talk about, one more category of kilayim, is mixing meat and milk. Mixing meat and milk is from the Torah prohibited cooking, because cooking is when you create a new entity. Even the rabbis have forbidden it across the board. And this bridges kind of both categories, because on the one end, there's no power of reproduction that gets affected, so it's not an essential mixture. But on the other hand, there's still something that's quote unquote new created, so it still kind of falls into the categories of the agriculture and the animals. And it also is from the same kingdom. So animal kingdom is mixing meat and milk. And we saw a lot of laws associated with all these things. That's the basic gist of almost where we're at. The section that we're in the middle is the question of, we have all these warnings against kilayim about mixing two things together. We had a lot of commentary about how this is a chok. This is a law that we don't understand. And the laws that we don't understand is where the mockers, both the internal mocker and the external mockers, will come after us for these laws that we don't understand. Yet it's a decree of the king. The king doesn't have to give us a reason. The king says, and so we have to do. But because it's not understood, we might not treat it correctly. All this kind of stuff. So we saw how strict it is, that there's no messing around when it comes to kilayim. On the other hand, the question that we're asking is, we thought that mixing is actually a good thing. Isn't the whole point of everything to bring opposites together? Isn't that something laudatory? Like, isn't that something that we should all be striving for? So how come all of a sudden when it comes to kilayim, which is written in the Torah, and the Torah is all about bringing peace, all of a sudden that, we're so strict about it that you're not allowed to mix anything? Shouldn't we be looking for ways to bring allowances to all parts of kilayim? Because mixing opposites, that brings harmony. Isn't that what life is supposed to be all about? And then we were seeing a lot of texts that support that. Rambam was saying that if you only have enough money in your house for either Hanukkah candles or Shabbos candles, or only enough money for Kiddush or for Shabbos candles, what do you buy? And it's always Shabbos candles, because Shabbos candles bring peace into the home. So we see that there's something about peace takes precedent. Rambam also quotes Mishlei, that all its ways are pleasant and its path is peace, talking about Torah. We saw from the Gemara of Tainus that it spoke about how you should be like a reed, soft and flexible instead of being stiff like a cedar, which cannot change and does not change. So our character should be more reed-like because we should be able to accept changes and compromises. That's better to be like that. We also saw from Rambam again, what is the straight path? The straight path is a path that finds a balance between two sides. Outside of climb, everything else seems to be saying, find compromise, learn how to balance two different things, etc. And then all of a sudden here, no, there's no mixing. We saw also about Oseh Shalom. God brings peace between the higher angels, between Malach Michael and Malach Gavriel, Michael and Gabriel, which are fire and water. They don't extinguish each other. Why? Because everything is just nothing before God. So there's an exception for them because they're matters of holiness. Everything is just nothing before God. We saw about the Shema that in a place where there is fear, there's no love. In a place where there's love, there's no fear except before God. Because only when we're talking about before Hashem is everything equal because everything is just nothing. So that's how the angels, they can make peace because they were just nothing. We were just this vessel for God to work through us. Versus down here, everything takes on a very distinct form. So on the one end, that's a good thing because now we can do mitzvahs with objects. I think the Alter Rebbe says that Malach Michael will give up like everything just for one strand of tzitzis because angels only reach a certain level in the world of Bria. If you remember, the four worlds on that third world, and mitzvahs are coming from God Himself. They're coming from much higher. God's will and desire is much higher than that world. Even an angel recognizes that whatever he can do and know and appreciate about God does not compare to being able to do a mitzvah down in this physical world. But on the other hand, because it's a physical object, because it's a defined entity, it means that it's harder to mix it. There's matter and substance and form. Two things can't coexist in the same place when it comes to physical stuff. That brings us to where we were. And this is Tanya. For inasmuch as the light and life of holiness, the internalized life force, are in a state of exile within the klipa, it does not surrender itself at all to the holiness of God. On the contrary, it soars aloft like an eagle, saying, I am and there is nothing beside me. Ani v'afsi'id. Or as in the statement of Pharaoh, the river is mine, I have made myself. Yorli v'ani asisini. When Moshe and Aaron come to Paro to say, let my people go so they may serve me, Paro is like, who is this God? Etc. And this is part of his statement of arrogance. The river is in the Nile river is mine and I made myself. Hashem told them they have to meet Paro early in the morning when he goes out to the river because he tried to prove himself to be godlike. So he would go out early in the morning to take care of all of his needs, and then he's just done for the rest of the day because he is so godlike and a God doesn't need to go take care of any needs. That's where Moshe and Aaron go to ambush him. There's nothing beside me, so that's the eagle. Why are we saying all these things? Because what is the definition of klipa, especially talking about things that are in the negative sense? Klipa snoga, if you remember, that's a shining klipa. That's the klipa that we can elevate. You know if something's good or bad unless you peel it open. So klipa means a shell or a peel. The idea of the peel is that you get rid of the peel and you want what's inside. Klipa snoga is gray. So there's black and white, quote unquote. So we get rid of the black and then we keep the white. As in, we're taking the godliness and we're elevating it versus stuff that cannot be elevated. If you remember all the way back when we learned in Tanya, what's the whole idea of arrogance? Why is it tantamount to idolatry? It's because it's an assertion of a self. I amness. And the more of an I amness you are, the less space you have for God. The less you can submit yourself to God because you're asserting yourself as an entity. Klipa, Sitra, Achar, all of that in general asserts itself as an identity. They recognize that God gives them life, but they don't recognize themselves as being subject to God. That they have to be submissive to God because I am still an entity. Oh, well, I'll follow the rules as long as they suit me. If they don't suit me, then I'm not going to follow them, kind of idea. When you have the godly light that's in it, that has to be in it or else it can't exist. However, it exists within it in a state of exile because it's in this entity that doesn't want to go along with the program. It's an entity that's rebelling. So you have a spark of godliness in something that doesn't want to be godly. That is why the sages of blessed memory said that arrogance is truly tantamount to idolatry. For the essence and root of idolatry is that it's regarded as an independent entity, separate from the holiness of God. Idolatry does not imply an outright denial of God, as it is stated in the Gemara that they of the realm of Klipa call him the God of gods, and the Kadalakaya. So although they don't deny his supremacy, their statement nevertheless constitutes idolatry. Idolatry is not necessarily atheism. It's not necessarily saying that there is no God. It's just saying there's God, but he's just not fully in control of everything. So anything that asserts itself as an identity that's not God. Sometimes people don't realize that they can fall into the trap of that, because as soon as you give power in any sort of way to an entity that's not God, that's falling into this trap of either you can say arrogance or idolatry. So it might not blatantly look like outright idolatry, but it's along the pathway of it. So as long as you're giving credit or power to something other than God, that's what that would be. If you're just like crossing your fingers and praying to luck for the lucky roll of the dice or something. Any of that's giving credence to something that's not God. Even in a negative sense, they say anything that's negative. There's forces at work, yes, but those forces cannot do anything without God having allowed them to have done something. So it's not an entity that exists outside of him. Rather, because they consider themselves true to be separate entities and independent beings, and thereby they separate themselves from the holiness of God, since they do not efface themselves before him, for the supernal holiness rests only on that which is surrendered to him, as explained above. For this reason, the Zohar calls the Klippa peaks of separation, Churi de Fruda, i.e. haughty as mountain peaks, and thus separate from God. A mountain peak is a very elevated entity, and that's what Klippa sees itself as being an elevated entity separate from God. But this constitutes a na of God's true unity, since his unity implies that all is esteemed as nothing before him. And all is utterly nullified before him, and before his will, which animates them all, and which constantly brings them into being out of nothingness. If you ever want to remake yourself, you should know that every second you are a new entity, because God has to keep us in existence, which means that every second we're being created all over again. Now, what are we seeing? Anything that is subject to holiness becomes less of an entity. Remember, kind of like the servant to the master. He's a non-entity, as in you are still a person, but you are not relevant in the sense of yourself is not relevant before God Almighty. Your capacities are to serve Him. Versus klipa setrachar, all that tries to assert itself as an identity. It tries to raise itself and elevate itself basically above its own station, because it will not submit itself wholly unto God. Oh, there is a God, but I don't have to listen. Is more the idea of it. Or like there's God and then there's me. Through many and varied tzimtzumim, remember tzimtzum of the contractions, the divine world brought into being the klipa and the sitra achara, who perceive themselves to be entities separate from God. Only God could create a world that denies His own existence. And He does that. What was the rewrite of the line from Usual Suspects? The greatest trick that God ever pulled was to convince us that we exist on our own. And then, so the line that we have is the greatest trick that God ever pulled was to convince us that we exist as independent entities. For this reason, God's word is described in the Torah as speech. For the element of separation found in human speech, the spoken word becomes separated from the speaker, is also present in the divine quote-unquote speech of creation. However, this separateness exists only in the perspective from which the created beings view their relationship with their source. From God's perspective, there is no separation at all, for everything is united with Him and is contained with Him even after it is created. So when we say that God spoke the world into existence, why are we using this language of speech? In our understanding and perspective of the world, when you speak, you do create something. It's a formulation of either an idea, whatever it is, when we speak, and that's an expression to outside of ourselves. However, when we speak, we also don't have those words anymore. Once you put them out there, you can't take them back. God, on the one hand, we say that God spoke, as in He expressed what was inside of Himself to outside of Himself. That's how we all came into being. On the other hand, God's words don't leave Him, because there is nothing that is not God. So we see it as a separateness because we're like, oh, here we are, and there's God somewhere out there. But for God, it's like everything just still exists within the Godness. Because, again, nothing else, there's no other entity that could have any other existence or any other power outside of Him. It's just not even an option. So even to give credence to anything like that, remember, it reeks of idolatry. Arrogance, the aggrandizement of one's own entity, is diametrically opposed to the surrender of one's identity, which is a corollary of the concept of God's unity. Arrogance represents the denial of the unity of God, which is why the Gemara equates with idolatry. So again, why is arrogance considered such a big deal? And why is it like idolatry? The second of the 10 Commandments. The first, no, don't do this. All of them. Why is it considered to be like that? Because it's anything that emphasizes your self-identity. Anything that says, I am a self. The more of an own entity I am, the less I'm acknowledging the fact that we're all still part of the Godness. We covered this in the Shema Mimer, where he says, why does he use the word echad instead of the word yachid? Shema Yisrael, Havai Elkeinu Havai Echad. Versus the word yachid, yachid means singular and alone. So alone, singular, seems to be the better word than echad, which is one, because if you say one, then there's probably a 2 and a 3 and a 4. We said the word one is indicative of the fact that there seems to be many, there seems to be a plurality within creation, yet is still all part of the oneness. Anything that has a sense of arrogance to it, why is it like idolatry? Because it is denying God's absolute unity. It's denying the absolute oneness of all of creation. Because it's saying that there is something else besides for everything that exists within the oneness of God. God's unity not only means there is one God, but also God is the only existing being. Thus, any feeling such as the klipa feel of having an identity apart from God actually represents idolatry. This is part of the explanation for how all mitzvot of the Torah are contained within the first 2 of the 10 Commandments. This is part of the parts of Tanya that talk about how was the world created and why do we know that, because eventually that leads to what does sin cause, and knowing this, how do we then refrain from it? Remember how we learned then also about how is it possible that all the mitzvos are within the first 2 of the 10 Commandments? Because what's the first commandment? Anochi Elokecha, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. Second commandment is Lo yeh lecha Elokim achem, Alpana, you should not have any other gods before me. That's the idolatry one. So one is I am God, and the other one is don't have other gods. How is that all of the Torah mitzvos? How is everything contained within those 2? Because everything which is a thou shalt, all the positive mitzvot fall under the category of I am God, because that is why we're doing stuff, because this is God, so we are doing for Him. All of thou shalt nots, all the prohibitive commandments fall under don't have any other gods before me, because the fact that I, God, tell you not to do this is why you're not going to do this, and the fact that you might do this, maybe, perhaps might be tempted to do this, is you saying, well, there's something else besides for God. Because if there's only God, how can you do what God doesn't want? So you see how then it all falls under the idolatry category, because only if you assert yourself, well, this is what I want to do, that's the only option that could lead you to doing something that God doesn't like, or doesn't want us to do. This is the verse from Eov. Eov is Job. Dominion and fear are with him. He makes peace at his height. He makes peace on high. Bamidbar Rabbah, so that's the Medrash on Bamidbar. Zener ene benos Tzion. B'melch Shlomo batar she'itra lo ima b'yom chasanasa v'yom simchas libo. It's the middle of a section, but it's referencing a verse from Shir Shirim. Shir Shirim is Song of Songs. On the day, that is what is written, go out and gaze, daughters of Tzion, at King Solomon, at the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding and on the day of the rejoicing of his heart. There's a verse of Bamidbar of on the day, and then it references this verse from Shir Shirim. There's a few different parts there. Believe it or not, I didn't take all of it. Only some sections. That's why the ellipses are there. Another matter, father at King Solomon. Solomon is Shlomo. Shlomo, which the language of Shalem, completeness. Shalem is like shalom, peace. You have peace when there's completeness. At King Solomon, Shlomo, at the king, capital K, who created his creations complete. Shlemim, God who created all of his creations complete. He created the sun and the moon in their fullness, and all the acts of creation were created in their full stature, as it is stated, the heaven and the earth and all their hosts. Haaretz v'chol tzva'am. That's Bereshit. So tzva'am is expounded as tivyonim in their full form. Bar Kapara said, sage, Adam and Chava were created as 20-year-olds. This actually section that I just said right now is not what's referenced. I just added it in because fun facts. Adam and Chava were created as 20-year-olds. They were created complete. Who's got Adam's baby pictures? Nobody. How old was Adam when he started to walk? He was less than a day old. How old was Adam when he started to talk? Less than a day old. This is part of the thing about carbon dating. They're like, oh, the world is 1 billion years old. No, God didn't create a young world. God created an old world. God didn't plant the seed for everything. God brought fully formed stuff out. God didn't just put tadpoles in and wait for the frogs to come out. Everything was created in its full form. Another matter, more explanation. At King Solomon's, Shlomo, we're looking at the word of completion again. At the king who makes peace between his creations. The heavenly beasts are of fire and the firmament is of snow. So here's talking about animals that exist in between layers, I guess you could say, quote unquote, of the heavens. The heavenly beasts are of fire. As it is stated, the beasts were darting to and fro like the appearance of a flash. This is from Yechezkel, Ezekiel, which, as you all remember perfectly, we learned something about the chariot in the Milchamocha Mimer. So it's talking about the animals, the Ophanim. They try to go up, described as the divine chariot, that they try to raise themselves up to see what's up above, and then they retreat. Up and retreat, up and retreat. Parts of the show is the whole other concept about it. It's brought down in Tanya. They did that if you want to nullify yourself within God. So it's something that's called close nefesh, expiry of the soul, that a person literally dies out of love for God. If you have that sense coming over you, you have to remember that God wants you to exist in this world. The whole point of everything is for you to bring Torah mitzvahs into this world. If you know the story of Aaron's sons, that's one of the mistakes that they made. The fact that, they brought the foreign fire before God. They wanted to bring Keturah. They died on the day that the Mishkan was inaugurated. If you see the language of it, so yes, on the one hand, they still died, but God doesn't specifically say that what they did was like a sin. So they shouldn't have done what they did, but at the same time, where were they coming from? So that's where you get the deeper explanation of that. They were so excited with the moment and they wanted so much to be returned to God. So that's going without the retreat. We have to remember, you can't just run forward. You have to retreat. You have to bring yourself back. When we see it here, so the angels, they're recoiling from fear. Like they want to see the level above them, but then they pull back. And that's the whole thing with the angels and the faces of the different animals and things like that. I think when we saw the Milchamocha Mimer, we're describing about how there's this idea, forward and the back, the forward and the back, aligns with the idea of a pulse to the universe. Breathing and heartbeats have that same kind of idea of the expansion and retraction and expansion and retraction, because everything has a spiritual source. That would literally be where the spiritual source of that comes from, the expanding and retracting. The firmament is of snow, as it is stated, over the heads of the beast there was the likeness of a firmament resembling the awesome ice. So Yechezkel still Ezekiel, his chariot, etc. Neither does this one extinguish that one, nor does that one consume this one. The fiery beasts in a firmament of ice, and they're not extinguishing each other. Rabbi Yochanan said, another sage is coming in, Rabbi Yochanan said, dominion or fear with him. That's the verse we just saw from Iyov. He makes peace at his heights, that'd be Oseh Shalom. Dominion, this is Michal, and he is of snow, and fear, this is Gavriel, who is of fire. So these two archangels. What does it mean that they're with him? They are devoted, mushulamim. So the word shlomo, shalem, mushlamim, to him. This one does not harm that one, and that one does not harm this one. So there's a completeness and peace between them, because these two entities coexist. They exist before him. Not only does he, capital H, go so far as to make peace between angel and angel, but even within one angel, he makes peace, as he has 5 faces. So now we're looking at other things about angels. So even an angel within his own self, there's peace. This is what is written. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like the torches of fire, his arms and his legs like burnished bronze, and the sound of his speech like the noise of a multitude. So that's from Daniel. So it's showing you all the different things that are mentioned here. It's showing that there's multiple things going on within an angel and there's peace within him. Neither does this one extinguish that one, nor does that one extinguish this one. A little explanation. The lightning and the fire are against the beryl, which is translated as resembling the sea, and the great multitude is likewise an allusion to water. So the explanation that's given here is just telling you that you still have a fire-water element and it does not extinguish itself. It is written, a river of fire flowed and emerged from before him. So this is still Daniel. And the firmament is of water, as it is stated. He roofs his upper chamber with waters. That's Tehillim. And Makar b'mayim aliyasav. Neither does this one extinguish that one, nor does that one extinguish this one. So we're looking at the idea, talking about King Solomon, who's Shlomo Melech, Shalom, Shalem, and all these things that are complete. Because there's peace and harmony. There's peace between them. Rabbi Yaakov Kfar Hanan said he makes peace in his heights, as in Oseh Shalom b'Mermav. The sun has never seen the concave side of the moon. An astronomy lesson. Notice there's an arrow. What does it mean? That never sees the concave side. Okay. Go to arrows. This is from the Gemara. Rosh Hashanah, that's what the tractate is called. Slight little footnote. What does it mean that it's never seen the concave side? As Rabbi Yochanan said, what is the meaning of that which is written? Dominion and fear are with him. He makes peace in his high places. From Iyov. It means that the sun has never seen the concave side of the new moon, nor has it ever seen the concave side of a rainbow, both of which always face away from the sun. It has never seen the concave side of the moon, as the moon would be distressed by a sense of inadequacy if its concave side faced the sun. Therefore, the sun sees only the full roundness of its convex side. In this way, he makes peace in his high places between the sun and the moon. Furthermore, the sun has never seen the concave side of a rainbow, so that the worshippers of the sun not say, as though the sun is a god, that the sun is shooting arrows at those who deny its divinity, using the rainbow as its bow. The concave side of the rainbow always faces away from the sun, so that it does not look like a bow held by the sun. Look, just to sidetrack again, talk about seeing the new moon and this and that. It's not because the full moon isn't there. The moon doesn't actually physically wax and wane. It just depends how much the sun is reflecting off of it. If you think about it though, because the state of the Igul and the circles, the earth stands still in the center, and then you have 8 circles around it that move around it like cogs. The last sphere are the constellations, and they're literally the Galgal Yomi. They start the turn, and then all the other spheres, all the other circles turn. You have the earth, you have the moon, differing opinions if there's a planet there, and then the sun. So the sun is always staying on a certain part of the moon because they're moving together. Obviously, the moon moves more than the sun because it's a monthly cycle, the way that it turns. You go look up in Rambam. Rambam explains exactly how the moon moves. And then the sun, it takes longer to travel around the earth. That's what we call a year. But the position of one to the other, the sun will be on the convex side of the moon. Do you even appreciate how much detail God put into the creation of the world? Okay, moving on. Now we're back to the Bimidbar Rabbah that we just saw. We just took a little sidebar for the Gemara. We're talking about God making peace between everything. Rabbi Yochanan said, there is no constellation that sees what preceded it, and there is no constellation that sees what is above it, only what is below it. Like this person that descends a ladder, turned backwards. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai taught the firmament is of water and the stars of fire, and they reside one within the other, and they do not harm one another. So where the stars reside, it is water, sham mayim. God split the waters, so you have the waters below and the waters above. That's where you get the word shamayim. Shamayim, there is water. And the stars are fiery, and they exist there. Even between the plagues, he makes peace, shalom, between them. That is what is written. There was hail and fire igniting, kachat within the hail. Plague of hail was like an ice ball with fire inside of it. So it would break on the ground, and it would burn things up. But how do fire and ice coexist? Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia, as in what do they say? Rabbi Yehuda said bowls of hail filled with fire. So that's what it looked like a bowl shape. Rabbi Nechemia said fire and water intermingled one with the other. Rabbi Hanan said the explanation of Rabbi Yehuda is that it's like the seed of a split pomegranate that can be seen from the outside. The explanation of Rabbi Nechemia is that it's like this lantern of a lamp in which water and oil are mixed as one, and it is kindled above them. So you see the imagery that they're trying to create about it. Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Simon said, what is mitlakachat? That's the word that's being used because the possuk says, Vahi vard ve'esh mitlakachat betoch habarad. So what does that mean? What is mitlakachat? It means dies meitan regus mitkahala to perform its mission in order to perform the will of its creator. Rav Ada said this is analogous to a king who had 2 powerful legions that would contend with one another. When a war involving the king came about, they made peace with one another and came and waged the king's war. So hail and fire contended with one another. When they saw the war of the Holon, blessed be he, with Egypt, it is stated there was hail and fire igniting within the hail. A miracle within a miracle. That is why it is stated at King Solomon, Shlomo, Shir. The king is Shlomo, the king's completeness, I think is what it's pointing out. Melch Shlomo, the completeness of the king. Okay, this is from Tanya Gerda Kodesh. He makes peace in his high places, Oseshalah b'mermav. Michael is the prince of water, and Gabriel is the prince of fire, yet they do not extinguish one another. Though water seeks to quench fire, and fire endeavors to vaporize water, and Michael is the prince of water, and Gabriel is the prince of fire, nevertheless they do not extinguish one another. To say, not that Michal's substance derives from the spiritual element of water, he's not literally made out of water, and Gabriel's substance derives from the spiritual element of fire, but that Michal is the prince of chesed, of kindness, which is called water because it wants to flow, wants to give, it wants to spread, because it descends from a high place to a low place. It's a giver giving to a receiver. In spiritual terms, this descent is the bestowal and diffusion of the divine life force from the higher to the lower world. Michal, chesed, which is like water, God is sending divine light from a high place down to a low place. Torah is like water because it comes from a high place and comes down to us in our low place, physical world. Fire, whose nature is to soar aloft, represents the vector of Gevura, severity, strength, etc., and the upward withdrawal of the flow of life force, in order not to bestow it except by way of an intense and immense contraction. One side you have the givingness, that it just wants to come down, and the other side is like, wait, let's hold on over here, let's reassess this. This is stuff that we've gone through many, many times. The giving and the withdrawal, the giving and the holding back. These attributes are in conflict. Chesed representing unlimited effusion, as in it just wants to spread forth, and Gvur representing limitation and contraction. So how can you have unlimited giving with constraint at the same time? They should be in conflict with each other. Someone's like, give, and the other one's like, no. But only when they're in their pristine state as attributes. So that's what they would look like before they start taking more form. As the attributes are inherently limited, the very word midah means measure. So the attributes we call the soul powers are called midot. Midah is a measure. Each is confined to its innate characteristics. Chesed to expand expansiveness, Gvura to withdrawal. They can only be these things in their most essential states. But the Holy One, blessed be He, makes peace between them, so they do not oppose one another. Through revelation, so how does He do this? Because when God is revealed to them to an extent, then they're just nothing before God. So that an immense illumination and intense effusion from the infinite Ein Sof light is revealed within them. For like His name, as in Ein Sof, infinite one, without end, so is He. He is not heaven for friend on the measured plane of an attribute, but transcends exceedingly ad infinitum, even the rank of the intellectual faculties of Chabad, the source of the attributes, and surely He transcends the attributes themselves. So how could God make peace between two attributes? Because God is higher than the attributes. God, who has no limit, what we're saying is that there's no container for God. Versus these, they have a containment. Kind of ironic to say that one's called Chesed, one's called Gvura. They define characteristics, but God is not defined by anything. So because God is the everythingness, He can make peace between. So it takes something or someone superior to make peace between warring factions. And then, when God's infinite light is revealed within the attributes, the opposing attributes of Michal and Gabriel, Chesed and Gvura, are absorbed in their source and root, and they become truly unified, and are nullified in His light, which radiates them in a manifest way. So 3 means that 1 and 2, which there can be division, live in harmony in 3, basically. Once their individuality is nullified, they no longer oppose each other. So if you're not stuck in your own ways, and instead we're going for the higher cause, then we can have peace between us. When you have too many alpha personalities, try putting them in a team together, and good luck with that. Instead, you need people who know how to the mission first. By way of analogy, the intense enmity of 2 high officials dissolves in the presence of their sovereign into friendship. The 2 ministers, they're always bickering and politicking against each other, but when the king comes, then all of a sudden there's peace between them. Because we are now in service of the king. It's not about you and me, it's about Him. This unity comes about because of the joint nullification before the king. So too the defined bounds of the various attributes dissipate in the face of the limitless revelation of the infinite light. You're going to assert yourself as a self before the divine light? That's not even an option. We're all just a nothing. That's why also things will succeed when we all put our own particulars aside in service of something greater than us. That's the only way that you can have any sort of unity between people. Not uniformity, unity. The Gvura are thereby tempered and mellowed, literally sweetened in the Chasadim. So Gvura gets tempered by Chesed and are transformed into good and kindness by mediating the determining factor between Chesed and Gvura, which leans toward Chesed, i.e. the attribute of Rachamim, mercy. Mercy will take kindness and severity, bringing them together, because that's why it's harmony. Rachamim is Tiferet, which is harmony. Automatically, it leans toward Chesed. So that's why the strength, the severities, the judgments get sweetened, they get tempered. When Chesed does not insist, so to speak, on an unlimited revelation of kindness, but is satisfied to reveal the godly illumination in a finite manner, okay, we can't just have unfettered godliness. We have to do this in a measure. And Gevurah only insists on withholding the revelation from those who are unworthy of receiving it, but does not insist on blocking the revelation altogether, even from the worthy. Then the mediating attribute of mercy, which leans toward kindness, declares that while a particular recipient may not be strictly worthy of the kindness, he is at least worthy of being granted it out of compassion. The whole idea of compassion is that even though maybe you shouldn't be getting everything, I'm still going to give you something, because that's how compassion acts. Chesed says, okay, I agree that we can't just have unfettered revelation. And Gvurah says, okay, I agree that we can't just block everything. So what makes that happen? Compassion, which is Tiferes, harmony and beauty, makes that happen. And it leans toward Chesed. So that way, even somebody who's undeserving can still get, is the general idea of it. This attribute of Rachamim is called Tiferet, beauty, as we have said, in the terminology of the Kabbalists. It's say Kabbalists, but the words of Tanya are Chachmei Emes, the scholars of truth. Because it is made up of the two colors, white and red, which allude to Chesed and Gevurah, respectively. Chesed, white, Gevurah, red. Remember, that's why animals are red-fleshed, because they come from the attribute of Gevurah. Rachamim is therefore called Tiferet because there is beauty in the harmony of diverse colors. It's not uniformity, it is unity. It's how can you both exist within the same entity without extinguishing each other. The divine name Havaya, the Tetragrammaton, as it appears unqualified throughout the Torah, therefore indicates the attribute of Tiferet, as it is stated in the sacred Zohar. The name of Havaya is a name that aligns with mercy, with Tiferet, which we know because we learned that in the Shema Mimer, that it says, Shema Yisrael Havaya Elokeinu Havaya Echad. The name of mercy and the name of judgment. The name of kindness is Kel. Kel, as in with an aleph. Each of the divine names indicates one of the supernal attributes. The name Kel, for example, indicates Chesed. Elokim indicates Gevurah. And any unqualified appearance of the ultimate divine name Havaya, known as Shema Etzem, the essential name, alludes to the attribute of Tiferet. So whenever you see one of these names, it's because it's speaking to which aspect, quote unquote, of God is at play here. For here, in Tiferet, the infinite Ein Sof light becomes manifest in an immense illumination, surpassing that of the other divine attributes. The name of Havaya is a greater light than the other attributes, which is the name of harmony. This then is the meaning of the above quotation, that he makes peace in his high places, as in Oseh Shalom b'Murmav. The revelation of God's infinite light makes peace between Michal and Gabriel, who represent Chesed and Gevurah. Now the awakening from above that elicits a manifestation of this great illumination, an immense diffusion from the infinite Ein Sof light, in order to bring about the above mentioned peace, as in what wakes us up to cause this to happen, that God should bring peace, which means bringing out a greater revelation, is affected by an awakening from below by the act of charity, as in tzedakah, and by the benevolent bestowal by one man to another of life, graciousness, kindness, and compassion to he who has nothing of his own, thereby to revive the spirit of the lowly and to revive the heart of the downcast. We actually changed charity to tzedakah because it's not the same thing. Okay, what wakes this up? That God will show this greater light. What do we do down here that has the ripple effect above that God shows this greater illumination? Tzedakah. Because what is the act of tzedakah? It revives the spirit of the lowly. It is giving life, graciousness, kindness, and compassion. Do we even understand how powerful the act of tzedakah is? Tzedakah is an all-encompassing mitzvah. It is the one mitzvah that, like no other mitzvah, brings Mashiach closer, because it's something that encompasses all of us, because all of you goes to work to earn money, which you then are giving to something or somebody else. And even if you inherited that money or something, but I could have used that money to sustain my life, and instead I gave it. So that is why tzedakah is such a massive mitzvah. When someone gives tzedakah to a pauper while raising his spirits, with a few warm and supportive words. So he's not only given life, but graciousness, kindness, and compassion as well. So you're not just giving tzedakah, but you're giving it wholeheartedly with a happy countenance. Then this awakening from below results in an awakening from above. Remember, everything has a ripple effect. So what is the ripple effect of tzedakah? Literally to the extent of going all the way up for God to show greater revelation, to bring peace between these two opposite angels, which has resulted now in a greater divine light being shown, being revealed. This releases an intense illumination of the infinite Ein Sof light into the supernal attributes. What is the benefit of this? Thereby making peace between them. And what happens when you make peace between them? And tempering and sweetening the Gvurd and the Chasadim. When you make peace between Michal and Gavriel, as in when you make peace between Chesed and Gvur, what happens? Gvura gets tempered by Chesed. Strength, judgment gets tempered by kindness. What does tzedakah cause? When you give tzedakah, and especially when you give it graciously and happily, you give tzedakah. This is what we call the awakening from below. We have initiated something. That goes all the way up. The ripple effect goes all the way up. And the ripple effect is that God's divine light, intense illumination, will shine, so that these two opposite factions will have peace. And as we saw already, Rachamim, compassion, mercy, when there was peace between the right side and left side, when there was peace between Michal and Gavriel, fire and ice, between kindness and severity, kindness and strength, then kindness will temper strength. So giving tzedakah tempers judgment. So you didn't just give tzedakah. We didn't just write the check, we didn't just donate, we didn't just put a penny in the poshka. There's a massive, massive ripple effect up on high. Tzedakah is a very, very powerful mitzvah. It can save a life even. But this is what tzedakah on a regular basis does. Okay, this is from Parshas Ve'era. So this is going back to the hail. And there was hail and fire flaming within the hail, very heavy, the likes of which had never been seen, had never been throughout the entire land of Egypt since it had become a nation. So God didn't just give them hail. He gave you hail like you've never seen before. What does that mean? It's just because the intensity of the hail? What does that mean? So this is Rashi, that it's flaming within the hail. This was a miracle within a miracle. Nes b'sech nes, a miracle within a miracle. The fire and hail intermingled. Although hail is water, to perform the will of their maker, they made peace between themselves. That the hail did not extinguish the fire, nor did the fire melt the hail. This sums up, over here, all the texts that we saw about the exemplary nature of bringing peace between two opposing sides. Which, this whole new topic that we just introduced here, it still brings us back to the ultimate question of kilayim. So why is kilayim such a big deal? Why we're not actually actively trying to create kilayim? Because if we're trying to bring two opposites together, isn't that what everything we've been learning is all about?